And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and let's talk about some underrated utility lands that I think deserve a little more attention in the format. I thought I would make a video specifically about a few lands that I've really become big fans of that don't see much play. These are all colorless utility lands, so they can very easily slot into any deck because, of course, they're a land. Just take a land spot up in your deck, but also they are colorless. I'm making this video because of Lazotep Cory, a card I stumbled across recently to put in a deck. And the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, why aren't more people playing this card? It's only in about 13,000 decks right now on EDH Rec, and it's only about $1. Again, these are all really budget cards for obvious reasons because not really a lot of people are playing them. I imagine that's why they're really budget. So this is sort of a budget video on top of everything else. I have made a few videos recently about cards that I think see too much play, and a lot of them are way more expensive than these. So maybe we could start swapping out cards here, right? So Lazotep Cory is a land desert, and I guess the fact that it's a desert means that it gives it a little bit more of a reason to put it in your deck. I don't think there's any downside to playing a desert, right? Certain cards like Scavenger Grounds, for example, say sacrifice a desert. So obviously everyone, I think I always just sacrifice my Scavenger Grounds to itself to exile all graveyards. And of course, that's a card that's played in a lot of commander decks. You actually don't have to do that. If you have a Lazotep Cory in play, you can just sacrifice your Lazotep Cory to exile all graveyards, save your Scavenger Grounds to use it again later in the game. So that is somewhat significant, but not probably the reason you're going to be putting this in your deck. I guess if you're playing a Desert Tribal deck, that would be another reason to put it in there. It taps to add a colorless, so not super great, but again, that is kind of almost an upside because, of course, it means there is no color identity here, so we can put it in any deck. Doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, though. That's really important to note, especially when you're dealing with the utility lands you want to be shoehorning into your deck. Tap, sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana of any color. Why aren't people playing this card more? Let's just concentrate on that for a minute. Of course, this is a card that could be giving you mana of any color, which is good. But so what? It's a sack outlet on a land. That's the important part here, right? And the reason why I have now ordered like 5 copies of this card to put in a whole bunch of decks is because, in my opinion, it is a better version of High Market. High Market, of course, is a commander staple, has been played in the format for so many years. I've had a lot of people say, oh, I just absolutely love it because it's a sack outlet on a land. Nobody cares that it's gaining life. I don't think anyone plays this card because it gains life. Actually, I have this card in my Patron of the Kitsune deck because it can gain life, but I don't think I've ever actually used it for that reason. It's like, okay, well, having a land in my deck that if I really need a life gain trigger, I can sacrifice a creature to gain 1 life to get that life gain trigger. I don't know if I've actually ever done that. Pretty much everyone puts High Market in their deck because they just want a sack outlet on a land, or, you know, instead of my creature getting exiled, I can sacrifice it so I get the dies trigger, right? That's another great thing is I have a lot of creatures with dies triggers, or I'm in an Aristocrats deck, or I have a commander with a dies trigger. I put High Market in my AO deck for that reason because I need sack outlets on lands to sacrifice my commander. But guess what? Despite all the printings of High Market, it's still like a $4 card. Lazotep Cory is way cheaper. And not only that, it's giving you 1 mana of any color, which I would say most decks would rather have the 1 mana of any color than the 1 life. Of course, I threw this in my AO deck as well for exactly the reason that I want to be sacrificing my commander. I actually got this for another deck, and when I looked at it in person, because I don't know, something about looking at a card in person sort of changes your perspective a little, I was like, well, hold on a minute. This is a sack outlet on a land. I want it in my AO deck so that I can sacrifice my commander. I need more sack outlets there. So it went right in there, and then I had to order another copy because it was even better in that deck. I had to order another copy for the original deck that it was meant to go on. I haven't even gotten to the ability yet that the reason I ordered this card in the first place is because of the last ability, not because of the sack outlet, but the fact that this is a sack outlet on a land, that alone means it should probably be played more than High Market, in my opinion. Also, though, you can pay X and 2, tap, sacrifice a desert. And again, this is sacrifice any desert. You don't even have to sacrifice this card. You can sacrifice some other desert that you have. Exile target creature card with mana value X from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie. Activate only as a sorcery. So, of course, this is the reason why, oh, well, this is an auto-include my AO deck, because not only can I sacrifice my commander, get the dice trigger, let it go to the graveyard, then use the next ability to exile it from my graveyard, get a copy of it, put it back in the command zone, use it again, right? So it's basically a reuse of my commander while getting around commander tax at least one time. But again, that ability is pretty fantastic. Just a reuse of a creature in your graveyard. And, it can be a little mana intensive, but I'm just thinking in any game, later in the game, I just pay, 5 mana and create a token copy of my Eternal Witness in my graveyard, and then I get another card back out of my graveyard that I really want, something like that. I mean, obviously there's 1,000 scenarios where you can be using that, but I mean, it's just a nice little added bonus on this card. The reason why I think a whole lot of people should be playing this card more is because it's just a sacrifice a creature on a land, which so many decks want. Moving on to removal on a land, Underdark Rift, and this is a card that flew under the radar for me entirely when Forgotten Realms came out, and now I'm a huge fan of it. Not really a lot of people are playing it. Again, it's like a 40-cent card, so dirt cheap, not that hard to run out and grab a copy. Taps to add a colorless mana again, but again, does not enter the battlefield tapped, so there's not really a whole lot of downside here. What's your ratio for colorless lands in your deck? It depends on how many colors you're playing. Everyone has a different opinion there. You're likely already playing a few depending on what deck it is, and this might be a better option. Pay 5 and tap, exile Underdark Rift. Roll a d10. Put target artifact, creature, or planeswalker into its owner's library beneath the top X cards of that library, where X is the result. Activate only as a sorcery. So the reason I wasn't a big fan of this card in the beginning is because of the roll d10 part. I don't like the randomness of that. I don't like dice rolling at all in the game of Magic. I don't like coin flipping, none of that. I don't like doing stuff at random. In my opinion, there's enough randomness in any game of Magic with just shuffling your library that I don't need to add more randomness. However, the randomness here is, are you going to get a 1 or you're going to get higher than a 1? That's basically the only randomness to this card. It's going to do something for sure. It's just a matter of how much does it do. If this goes 10 deep, it's likely you'll never see that card again. If it even goes 5 deep, you might never see it again because, of course, your opponent's going to shuffle their library, so they'll probably end up shuffling it away. If you use this on someone's commander, they will guaranteed, I would say, put it back into the command zone, so this becomes exile target commander. It is dealing with an artifact, creature, and planeswalker on a land. That's very unique. I know this is mana intensive. People will say, oh, this is 6 mana because you have to tap this land plus another 5. Yeah, maybe, but it's on a land. This is removal on a land. How easy is it to slot into a deck? And if I get into that really sticky situation where my opponent has a Darksteel Forge in play, now I can get rid of it, right? Because, of course, this gets around indestructible. It gets around a lot of stuff because it's putting it into their library. There can be some sticky situations for that. And in certain colors, especially like a mono red deck, which is going to have a hell of a time getting rid of a Darksteel Forge or any indestructible creature, this can deal with that, right? This is a card that can deal with a lot of things that certain color combinations might not be able to deal with. I think it's an easy slot into a lot of decks and could actually save your life. And, I've been a little harsh on the MDFC removal. And for me, this is better than MDFC removal because it is a land and it is removal, right? That's why I like utility lands over MDFC lands, because with MDFC lands, you only get 1. With this, I can just play it turn 1 or turn 2. It'll just sit there tapping for mana every single turn until I need that situation to happen where my opponent's got a Darksteel Forge or my opponent's got an Avacyn. I absolutely have to get it off the battlefield, and this will do it. Yeah, it's kind of mana intensive, but it's an answer on a card that has been sitting there giving me mana every turn. I think that's pretty good. All right, speaking of lands that enter the battlefield tapped, but this one I think is totally worth it, Path of Ancestry. And this is technically a colorless land, so it can go in any deck, and it enters the battlefield tapped. However, it's going to tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. When that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with your commander, scry 1. So, of course, everyone's familiar with this card. It's been reprinted in a ton of commander sets. It is probably played by a lot of people, but in my opinion, not played enough. I mean, I'm sure it's in a ton of decks, but it probably should be in more decks. And again, super budget. It's only 11 cents or something like that. So that's definitely not going to be an issue. You should be playing this card more. Now, why should you be playing this card more? Because this is a card that enters the battlefield tapped and taps to add 1 mana of a color. How good is that? If they came out with a land that enters the battlefield tapped and gives you 1 mana of any color, who would be playing that in their commander decks? Everybody would be playing that. I mean, it has no downside other than it just enters the battlefield tapped. Going forward for the rest of the game, it adds 1 mana of any color. Now, of course, it doesn't actually add 1 mana of any color. It adds 1 mana of any color, your commander's color identity. But unless you're playing a Send Triplets deck, you don't care because the color of your commander's identity is all that you need, obviously, right? A lot of people look at this card, and it's funny how things work with people's mindsets. When you look at this card, you go, okay, well, that goes in a tribal deck because I want all the creatures that I'm casting to be the same creature type as my commander. No, ignore that. This is just a land that taps for any color of mana throughout the entirety of the game. And if you happen to cast a creature that shares your commander's creature type, you get to scry 1. That's just an added bonus. If you put this in a deck where you have 0 creatures that are your commander's creature type, this is a land that enters the battlefield taps to add 1 mana of any color, and lets you scry 1 when you cast your commander. That's the worst scenario for this card. And then if you happen to have any other creatures in the deck that are also your commander's creature type, you get to scry 1. But just tapping to add 1 mana of any color. More people should be playing this card. Abstergo Entertainment is one that came out in Assassin's Creed, and I would say is the most expensive of the bunch here at like $1.30. But again, pretty budget, I would say. And I think the Assassin's Creed set got a little poo-pooed on, didn't really get a whole lot of attention. I think this is definitely worth giving consideration for a lot of decks likely out there. It is a legendary land. That could be significant, maybe, maybe not. Taps to add a colorless, again, doesn't enter the battlefield tapped, which means not a whole lot of downside. You can filter mana with this, so you can pay 1 and tap, add 1 mana of any color. If you get in really sticky situations, you can use that. That's good to have. You're not putting it in your deck for that reason, though. You're putting in your deck for the last ability here. Pay 3 and tap, Exile, Abstergo Entertainment, return up to 1 historic card from your graveyard to your hand, then exile a graveyard. So that ability is really fantastic. And this is another card similar to Lazotep Cory that I got 1 copy for 1 deck where I'm like, okay, I got lots of historic stuff. I can get stuff back out of my graveyard. In fact, I think it was my AO deck, funny enough, because that is an artifact deck. So it's very easy for me to get artifacts out of my graveyard, obviously, with this. And it's also graveyard hate. That can give you an upside because you also get something out of your graveyard. It's a land that I can get something out of my graveyard with that also happens to be graveyard hate, right? Whichever one is more important to you. Maybe the graveyard hate is more important to you, but hey, I also get a historic card out of my graveyard. Maybe you're putting it in your deck because it could just get my commander out of the graveyard, right? This is just get my commander back out of the graveyard, return it to my hand, and then added bonus, I exile a graveyard. So either of those scenarios, this card is pretty good, I think. All right, I'm going to end off with a silly one here, Springjack Pasture. And this one I thought I would tack onto this video because I think it should be played a little bit more than it is in the commander format. Of course, again, very budget, not expensive at all. You can get it for under $1. If you haven't seen it before, it taps to add a colorless mana. So again, we're in that scenario, taps to add a colorless mana and doesn't enter the battlefield tap, so not a lot of downside. You can pay 4 and tap it to create an 0/1 white goat creature token. So it's a land that creates creatures and also makes tokens. That seems pretty significant. And you can tap it, sacrifice X goats, add X mana of any 1 color, you gain X life. So again, we're in the similar scenario to the Path of Ancestry, where people look at this card and go, oh, it goes in a goat tribal deck, which, of course, who has a goat tribal deck out there? So why would I put it in my deck? I will give you a couple reasons to put this in your deck, okay? First of all, if you're playing any token theme, I think this is worth putting in there. Because, I mean, again, has literal no downside, and maybe at some point during the game, you want to put a goat token into play so that you can get a trigger off of your Benny Brax on the end step. You know, that totally seems worth it. Maybe you're in a deck where you just want creatures in play, the aristocrats type of scenario, where maybe putting that 0/1 goat into play can be really, really important later in the game. Maybe I can just put this into play to block my opponent's huge creature that doesn't have trample. I've seen people do that with a trading post before, where I'm just going to put the goat token in play to chump block because I'd rather take 0 damage than 7 or 8, right? Can be used for a lot of situations like that. You can also just kind of crank out the goats and eventually sacrifice them with that last ability. That is a possibility as well. I know it's a fringe one. This should see play though more because it is just a land that both makes creatures and creates tokens. I think there's a lot of decks that could be using it, regardless of the fact that it's a goat. The other place where I think this should be seeing way more play, and I just talked about this in my new decks video where I talked about all my new decks. I have this in my Jarina deck because if you have a Maskwood Nexus effect in play, of course, all your creatures are goats, and this allows you to sacrifice all your creatures. And again, we're back into the high market Lazotep Cory situation where a lot of decks want to be sacrificing their creatures for various reasons. And in fact, I put this in that deck for the reason that I have Hakon in the deck, which is very much the deck is built around. And if he gets exiled, that sucks. I'm in a tough position, and having a sack outlet for him, if my Maskwood Nexus is in play, he's a goat. So in response to a Swords to Plowshares, I can sacrifice him and have him go to my graveyard, which no problem if he's in my graveyard, obviously, right? That is very important to note. But in a Changeling deck, I think this is a slam dunk. If you are in Changeling Tribal, try to fit this in your deck. I know a lot of people are out there doing the 5-color Changeling Tribal. This just allows you to sacrifice any of your creatures. Again, it becomes a higher market and a Lazotep Cory combined into one, because this becomes sacrifice a creature, add 1 mana, and gain 1 life. And then, of course, again, back to the other scenario where my opponent cast a board wipe that, I don't know, exiles all my creatures or something. I can just sacrifice all my creatures so I can get dice triggers. I can sacrifice them all so they go to the graveyard instead of getting exiled. Or I can just sacrifice them all to gain a bunch of life, because better than nothing, right? So this card, I actually think, even though it is pretty niche and kind of fringe, probably should see a lot more play. People just look at this card and go, oh, it goes in a Goat Tribal deck. It actually probably goes in a lot more than that. There you go, a bunch of colorless utility lands that I think should be seeing a little bit more play in the format. They're all very budget, really easy for you guys to go out and grab a couple copies if you want. Try them out in your decks. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.